Just a few words about us. I'm working on kind of bunch of projects, but in past 20 years I'm working on Samba, and in past 12 years I'm working on free APA, and sometimes our needs so intervene, but it's hard to tell where you are starting, where you're ending, and so on. But Andreas has more focus.
Yeah, I'm the Samba maintainer at Red Hat, and I also work on different open source projects, and I'm a Samba team member since quite a lot of time now. Yeah, so let's go back a bit.
Yeah, this is continuation of a talk that happened 6 years ago. Can someone tell what happened 6 years ago? 6 years ago, we hopefully presented that Samba AD could be ready for enterprise. And that talk was showing how you can build Samba AD with MIT Kerberos. We ended up with, I think, 4 questions for future.
Yeah, so this was one of the last slides of the presentation back in 2017, and it was about what is still missing in the implementation, and that was PK-init support, smart card support, services for you, and also read-only domain controller support.
In 6 years, we kind of spent time on gradually filling in the missing parts. The one completely missing part is still there and will be there for foreseeable future is the read-only domain controller support, because that requires quite fundamental refactoring of MIT Kerberos way how KDC is built, and that's not gonna come unless somebody really invests in it.
So what did we do instead? And instead we implemented support for resource-based constraint delegations. This is also a link which you can follow, and this, if you follow this link, you will find a blog post which explains resource-based constraint delegation in details. It is very, very good. The Microsoft documentation is quite confusing, but this blog post is gold, and the implementation I did is based on this blog post.
And the implementation in Samba AD.
Yeah.
And the implementation I did in FreeAP is based on that blog post and Andreas' implementation in Samba. So we still like really good people.
And then we also added support for the asserted identity. The asserted identity is an indicator that S4U to self happened or not, or just basic. And that's an additional SID in the group memberships.
So this work actually took us from 2018-19 until actually April of this year. And the reason for that was not entirely obvious. It's fixing security bugs for more than 5 years with the span of these bugs across, believe it or not, the whole industry. Here's the story.
Yeah, so what was driving all of this work we talked about before, like resource-based constraint delegation, and that was security bugs in Kerberos protocols and implementations. So which security bugs are they? One is known as the Bronzebit attack, but also we had several identity mismatches with unprotected parts of Kerberos tickets, and yet more of them, and we will go into details about them in the next slides, but maybe you already heard them last year. I think Andrew Bartlett gave also a talk about.
Yeah, if you want details on the specifics of these CVEs and how they affected everyone, you better to rewatch what Andrew was telling about. But there is always more to the story than just this one. And we start with the Bronzebit.
Yeah, so first comes the Bronzebit attack. The Bronzebit attack is another variation of the older golden ticket and silver ticket attacks against Kerberos authentication. The idea is to get a privileged ticket without authentication, or with a less privileged ticket to get a higher privileged ticket. The difference between the golden ticket, silver ticket, and now the Bronzebit attacks is in what parts of the Kerberos authentication protocol the attackers go after. And in Bronzebit, the case is that attackers now go after S4U and S4U, so the S4U protocols, S4U to self and S4U to proxy.
Yeah, and typical attack vector is that it relies actually on defaults in Active Directory. So you're able to enroll machines as a user, you're able to set up some machines and then trick other users to connect to these machines and get to behave on behalf of the user. And when you behave on behalf of the user and you control all of this, you get some tickets and you get some way of fooling KDC on these checks. So the fix to this is obviously fix the client side, fix the server side, meaning the KDC side. But it appeared that fixing this in MIT Kerberos required, and actually also in Heimdal, it required substantial rewrite of the Kerberos code. And not only that, it also required to document all of this. The documentation in Microsoft protocols was incomplete, and finding out all these flows took Isaac probably 6 to 7 months.
So the Bronzebit mitigation was the prerequisite work for RBCD support in MIT Kerberos.
Yeah, the thing is, RBCD is an interesting kind of thing. It moves the decision making, who is able to delegate to what, to the final target service. The target service says, I don't want anyone but this specific server to delegate user credentials to me. And Microsoft put a lot of effort into fixing their side for the Bronzebit with introduction of the some changes to the policies. And one of the policies was, if you're in the different forests, you cannot use constraint delegation. You have to use resource-based constraint delegation. You simply stop doing that. And I think in 2021, they even changed defaults and disabled delegation over forest. This impacted free IPA pretty much very hard, because IPA represents itself as a separate AD forest. It's not a part of other forests, it's a separate forest. So for us, delegation across the forest, if users are coming from AD, stop it working. You have to tweak some settings in AD and then it continues to work, but this is a security problem and we have to fix this. But to fix this, you have to introduce certain things at the server side so that there are checks in place and they are done in certain order and conditions and so on. And that meant actually rewriting the interface for the KDC side of the driver. And rewritten API always hurts those who use API, and delivering new API in released distributions is kind of a hard thing. So we got a lot of people working on this, and I think the final one, when Andreas actually made RBCD support in Samba AD, it was a huge pull request that generated, I don't remember how many, 200 comments, where we ran back and forth trying to figure out things together in multiple upstreams.
Yeah, so the work for Bronzebit and resource-based constraint delegation was started by Isaac Buchrist some time ago, but then he left Red Hat and it was continued by Robbie Harwood. Then Robbie Harwood moved to a different team, and then I picked it up, and finally we got help from Greg Hudson from MIT, who finished the implementation and worked together with us, figuring out an API and finishing all the work and releasing a new version of MIT Kerberos. This also has been started in Heimdal, but only on the client side, and it's not finished yet.
Yeah.
So the Bronzebit work benefited a lot from the Kerberos test suite we have in Samba. And as I was implementing the Samba side and Greg from MIT implemented it in MIT Kerberos, he was able to run the Samba test suite against MIT Kerberos and figure out what is going on, what do we need, and implemented all the missing pieces and tweak error codes that they match more or less what Microsoft returns.
Yeah, so this was really a crucial part. So having Samba test suite for Kerberos was done in a such way that it ran against Windows and it recorded responses that the Windows did. So we basically had a kind of a sample how they should behave if we implement. We didn't have implementation, but we had some sort of a target to work on. And that target included how many tests? Hundreds, I think, overall, for smaller Kerberos changes. Like if we use this checksum, then this checksum should come back, and these kind of things. And given that Heimdal, against which it was developed, and MIT Kerberos are different independent implementations, there are a lot of small difference between them. So we work it through test suite for the compatibility. But the important part here was that MIT upstream developers, namely Greg, was able to run this test, Samba provided test, to do a lot of this work independently in parallel. So we kind of moved back and forth together and did this work. So this MIT pull request 1225 is a kind of a nice example of cross-project teamwork on a very complex topic.
So the Samba Kerberos test suite is in the meantime more than 20,000 lines of code. So it's one of the biggest which is actually out there in the open source world, I guess.
I think it's even bigger, way bigger than Microsoft's official protocol test suite for Kerberos.
As Alexander already mentioned, RBCD is key for cross-force communication in the meantime. And there is a free IPA design document which collects many use cases and shows a nice table what works and what worked before and how it is done now. So when you get the slides, you can click on the link on here and get more details if you want.
Yeah, and the RBCD support on the server side is not in Samba AD built against Heimdal. It's still missing some hooks and things there. But Samba tool has support for setting up permissions for RBCD. So because that's just a permission in the LDAP tree, so you can define them. Eventually, I hope Heimdal gets these server-side support and those permissions can be used. Right now, they only used if you build Samba AD with MIT and at relatively newest version, I think 120, at least 120. We hope to get all of this kind of in reasonable state relatively soon.
Yeah, so if you use Samba tool delegation -- help, you will get the information how to set up RBCD. Yeah, so after Bronzebit, it was getting dark in the forest. Now comes several security issues which gave us a bad headache in the beginning, and we thought we have a big problem. So internally, we called it the Black Forest project to actually fix that, which is also a name of an area in Germany. The Schwarzwald is called the Black Forest, and we used that internally when we talked about it because we didn't want to give too much detail to other employees. So it all started with a security update by Microsoft on November the 9th in 2021. and 4 issues among the published security fixes were attributed to the Samba team and its members, and all of them were elevation of privileges vulnerabilities inside of Active Directory.
Again, for more details about these CVEs, please watch Andrews' talk from last year. And we just want to point out that this is majority of these things apply to any Kerberos implementation with Samba AD. But there were some specific things that kind of also affected MIT, or specific things that only affected Heimdal. For example, because we did not have read-only domain controller implementation.
Yeah, so together with Microsoft, Samba did a coordinated release of these CVEs, and these are the CVE numbers on Samba side, and we will do a little bit closer look into the issues so that you understand a little bit better what it is about.
Right, so most of these bugs, they kind of look into a fundamental problem that Kerberos itself is authorization protocol, but it has no additional metadata about the environment it runs on. So whatever is Kerberos principle, it's not really specified how this applies to the outer world way it works. So in POSIX environment, we have a completely different things, usernames and so on. In Windows environments, there are seeds that represent objects, and that's a nice scheme, but still the principles needs to be mapped to these objects somehow. And this is where this mapping broke or intentionally got broken, and certain things happened, and especially that this affected us, meaning those who work with interoperability between two worlds. So some examples is you can intentionally break mapping in Windows in Active Directory in a such way that Windows doesn't care, but this mapping becomes very important on POSIX side if you use this. So you can name machine a root, a machine name in Active Directory or in NT environment, since that's where it's coming from, will have a $, at the end. So root $ is different than root, but this $ is dropped when you map the principal like that on the POSIX side, and you become a root. So there was an attack that exploited this kind of thing. You're a machine and suddenly you're a privileged user on the system, just using a machine account from unrelated machine called root. That was kind of thing to fix. And there was a lot of bugs in LDAP implementation in both Samba AD and in Microsoft one. Funny part of it is that Free API was not affected. Largely because we solved similar problem 4 years before that. We did not consider it a security problem, we still do not. But one of these things that allow us to solve it is the uniqueness constraint on the names, which did not exist and still not exist in Windows. And I think which we actually introduced in Samba AD. Uniqueness for the names. Names have to be unique when they add it, rather than have aliases with the same names as somebody else. Okay.
So name-based authentication in Kerberos, in general, but also in Kerberos, have been known to have issues for a long time. There is a lack of user and group namespaces. A user root defined on one Linux machine is not necessarily the same root user on a different Linux machine. It can have a different UID number. You don't know that. So the Kerberos protocol deals with principles, for example, user at realm. And for authorization purposes, applications need to map a Kerberos principle to a local operating system user identity. So from a name to a UID in the end.
Yeah, and the most important part here is that the solution is to have a Kerberos ticket where you have this principle also containing information or metadata about the environment, how this maps into target environment. In Active Directory, PAC, privilege,
Privilege
attribute certificate is used to contain this information. One part of the problems with the CVEs, with what we called Black Forest, was that under certain conditions, someone can actually mint their own PAC, regardless of what KDC does. And this is the part of triggering and replacing part was not only finished when all of this was published. Just a half a year ago, Microsoft published another one. This is what we will be talking a bit later. But the most kind of good lesson we took out of it is we have to switch everything to have PAC. We cannot afford anymore to have tickets without PAC. In most environments with Samba AD, that was the case already, because, well, you deal with Windows machines and they expect PAC to exist and so on. But in the mixed environments where there's a lot of Linux or POSIX overall machines, maybe you don't have PAC present or consumed or enforced. That was the most important part, enforcement. So you could be triggered into a situation where these identity mismappings happen. And some of these, fixing these problems took a lot of time, but recognizing that these are the problems took even more time.
So to fix these problems, a fix was required to have better protection at the database layer in AD, to also check, for example, SIDs and not compare names. Then enforcement of cryptographic signatures in the Kerberos tickets, so additional checksums, and enforcement of PACs to have more information about the environment to the app, which is consuming the PAC. And this was done to fix these CVE problems. So one of the CVEs, the first one was to always require a PAC, but also there is now an additional PAC buffer called the PAC Requester SID. And this buffer holds the SID of the name of the ticket, and this way you can validate that the client principal, the username more or less resolves to the same SID as in the PAC Requester SID. And if they match, everything is fine, and if there is a mismatch, then you just don't give it access.
Yeah, and the most important part out of this is that this basically makes environments where you don't have PACs or something obsolete. These environments today, even if you have some fixes, up-to-date fixes, they're vulnerable. It should be absolutely clear. If you don't have PAC enabled, you will be hacked into. There is no solution other than use what was developed. And these checksums that were added, eventually they were added in such places which are out of control for the attacker. So that's why the fixes, but it relies on the extensions that use PAC, and therefore MIT Kerberos decided to change the defaults and force enforcement of PACs, even empty PACs, which is just a structure, to solve these problems. This is gonna hit everyone. Well, it's kind of starting with 121, which is about to be released this year. But luckily we're ready. So Samba is using PACs already, so Samba AD environments are not affected so much. If you upgrade all the code, you will have all the protection, free IPA as well. But raw MIT without anything will be broken or Heimdal will actually be broken as well if they don't do this.
Yeah, the next bug didn't affect MIT Kerberos. We do not support read-only domain controllers with MIT Kerberos, so it was only a problem with Heimdal and was only fixed there. The next problem was a user mapping, which we already talked about, that you could have the problem that a root account is mapped to a root user on a system and could become the root this way. So what we added is now also a minimum UID you could map to, and by default it is 1000. So you could not map to UIDs below 1000. So there is no way to get system accounts. And you can also raise this to the number how you configure your ID mapping. That
in all this kind of attacking surface, root is just a handy thing to explain the problem, because everyone understands that the root is privileged. The thing is that this applies to any name. So if you have a machine named Oracle, someone can impersonate Oracle account on the machine. If the Oracle database is running there, it's leak of information from that database, not necessarily overtake of the machine. It's still a huge problem for the business. And substitute those names with any other names, DB2 or anything specific, even Apache, that's enough to cause a lot of problems. So it was worth working on it, and this should be said, it's not just like Andreas, me, or Isaac or others working. It is the whole Samba team working on it for more than a year on fixing these kind of problems.
Yeah, and there is an smb.conf option you can modify, and whatever your ID mapping range is, you can raise that number to higher numbers and then have more accounts protected.
Right. So one important part was that unlike the previous kind of things where we're coming and asking, please give us this API, and maybe other project finds time to give this API, this proved to be a fruitful collaboration. So we really worked with MIT Kerberos and partially also with Heimdal when we were fixing these problems, discussing the problem set, discussing and getting the view of MIT, for example, community, which has a totally different use cases for them, not related to Windows or Active Directory integration. It was really fruitful discussion and then collaboration. They responded fairly fast. They proposed several solutions. They discussed a lot of this and wrote code and used our tests, like I said.
Yeah, as the API for the KDB driver changed, we used the opportunity also to fix certain problems we had or couldn't do before. So changing APIs normally means you need a new release with it. There's problems for the projects using this API. So as for issuing PAC, we needed to create a new API. We used the opportunity to pass down more parameters, which we needed, for example, to implement PK init support for the pre-auth correctly, as Microsoft wants to have certain additional things there. So we pass down the right key in order to validate and check certificates and update them. And so Greg Hudson from the MIT implemented or improved the KDB changes, and I implemented at the same time all the missing parts in Samba, and we run the test against it, and then we saw what still doesn't work, what needs fixing on the MIT side, what did I wrong on the Samba side implementation, and often it really helps as Greg knows this stuff by heart, and he could explain how it is meant to be working and why it is that way, or why did he implement it this way, and you need to adapt the Samba code accordingly. And also it was an opportunity to merge certain functionality. So we had functions for MIT Kerberos and Heimdal, and so we merged code that we only have one implementation of that. So it was deduplication of code, which was also ongoing during this time.
So one part of it, it always talks about PKI init, so you get to wonder how PKI init, which is smart card support, did not exist in MIT before. No, it existed. It's just that, as usual with Active Directory extensions that Microsoft implemented, they had another extension for PKI init to allow, if user has a password in the system but authenticate with a smart card, to use a reply key from the Kerberos communication when smart card authentication happened to encrypt the user hash to pass it back to the machine so that it can be used for NTLM related operations on the machine. And this part, passing this reply key, modified reply key, was not there and wasn't possible to use this. And this is what was complemented in this one. But we still have a lot of other stuff missing. Well, a lot is kind of a big word. I think there are two things missing on the Samba side and one thing missing on MIT side.
Yeah, so Andrew added some time ago authentication audit logging, and I've also implemented this in MIT Kerberos, but the tests don't pass because currently they are crashing. Which is, it looks like it's a telog, a Python telog bug I need to look into. And then it's probably also looking what are the differences between what are the tests expecting and what are we doing wrong. Yeah. So this is work in progress, but I didn't have time to finish it.
Yeah, the other problem is more fundamental and also questionable whether we do need to work on it or not. It's the elliptic curves support in these smart cards in PKI init. MIT doesn't have this elliptic curves implementation, but Microsoft basically decided to use elliptic curves for smart card and falls back to SHA-1 type if you don't support ECC. The problem is that SHA-1 is going to be said goodbye. We already said goodbye. You can listen this on my next talk, but it's not like possible. But also ECC is something also questionable from the post-quantum point of view, because all this elliptical stuff going to be the first one in the order to be correct. So depending on the point of view, it may be a serious problem or maybe a just good thing that we don't have this. And the remaining part is a work in progress in Samba right now, this compound claims support. We also need to add this to MIT, Samba AD based on MIT to have it. But also there's a question how many applications actually do use that. We have a few slides left, I think. Yep, and if you look into our lists of failing tests, most of the tests that we see there are actually failing because of the minor behavioral changes between implementations, or like error codes are different. That's normal. We need to enhance our test suite to accept error codes on both sides, but that means that we need to verify results on it. There are a few things that we still need to implement to make this happy, and we need to understand how much of those tests apply to the reality, like the old ciphers in the checksums that not used by updated Windows versions anymore. Should we really test them or should disable them? Or like RC4 tests, should we simply retire and say we are now targeting really stuff that should be there and not what was in past, and so on. We want to get Samba AD with MIT into a state where we can say, in Fedora at least, that it's a supported configuration so that user can rely in the releases. And for that, we have few things to do. So one of them is we already run Samba test suite as a part of RPM build process, but it's not hooked.
I'm trying to.
Yeah, it's not hooked into the compose testing and not gating into Fedora releases. But we do this for free APA, so we have some experience on it. And we need to work with Fedora QA to get the same for Samba AD.
Yeah, so I'm currently trying to run Samba self-test as part of the RPM process. And this takes quite a lot of time. I already fixed a lot of bugs, but I'm also running into issues I don't understand yet, and I need to figure them out. And the plan is to run Samba self-test as part of Fedora gating. That means after the packages are built, these tests are running. Before they go, the packages are pushed into the distribution. So we would detect issues or problems early and then are able to fix them and get better quality in Fedora.
Right, and Fedora QA is actually using OpenQA instance, which is originally was written by Susie Folks and is actively used by Susie Folks. It's a fruitful cross-distro collaboration, so it allows to do a lot of stuff. It allows you to do a full cycle of testing from VMs booting, so you can do test of secure boot, for example, or something like that, and some other kind of parts of the framework testing, including booting into the graphical mode and testing that what you see on the screen is actually what you expect to see there. And there are some what called needles or something that allow you to verify things. So this is a video that is recorded automatically in OpenQA tests. Every single test gets this recorded and it's speeding up. So you see it's staying just because it actually waits until another VM provisions the main controller. After that, it will launch a graphical stack and we'll try to join or enroll this machine into the domain controller.
Using a graphical interface.
Using graphical interface. I think it uses Cockpit UI for this. And then I think it logs into IPA after that. We want to use the same. So we have the basics things we just want to replace in these tests or duplicate these tests and use Samba AD and enroll the same way because the Cockpit interface supports enrolling into Active Directory already. Yeah, it's a bit fast here, but it joins domain from that side and does it there. So it's game over.